But there's still a big opportunity in Mexico with 50% of the people out bank accounts, just 20% of the people with the credit cards. So there's still a big opportunity, but it takes time to have everything in place in order to grow.
Hello, this is Shawn Budde of Ensemble X, and this is the Ensemble X Exchange podcast. Today I'm talking with Joaquin Dominguez, the Chief Credit Officer at Voila, Mexico. Joaquin has over 10 years of experience in the financial industry. He started his career at Citibank before deciding to become a professional rugby player in Scotland. He's held positions in his home country of Argentina and Spain. He is now in Mexico with Voila, where Joaquin has spent the last 3 years as the Chief Credit Officer, growing the credit business 30-fold from its earliest days. So Joaquin, let's start with rugby, of course. You started your career at a huge international bank, Citibank, and then you went to Edinburgh to play rugby. What made you do such a thing?
First, thank you for inviting me here. I'm really glad to be here. My rugby didn't start when I went to Edinburgh. I played some national teams in Argentina. I played the World Cup under 19. And then when I was 23 to 24 years old, I was working like the last 2 to 3 years at Citibank, and an offer came to me to go to Edinburgh, and I said, this is the only moment that I could do so.
Yeah.
So that's the reason I went for it. So I went 2 years to Edinburgh and 1 to France after that, and then got back to the financial industry.
Rugby is one of those sports that is pretty popular in a lot of the world, but not really in the U.S. Almost everything I know about it comes from the movie Invictus. Actually, I had the good fortune of watching the U.S. beat Australia for the bronze in the Olympics this year, and that just crazy last-minute run. What is rugby like? What are the fans like? I'm curious about that because I know what British soccer fans like. Rugby's a more violent game. Are the rugby fans even more violent than the soccer fans?
Great question. So rugby obviously is I wouldn't say violent, but it's a physical sport. So one thing I love about the sport is the brotherhood you generate when you go into a field. Because obviously when you go on a physical sport together with a 15 people team, you rely on each other, the guy on the right and the guy on the left, and that's all you have. So what you do normally, or what I used to do, is build small societies within the 15 people team. So my position was inside center, that's 12. So I'm next to the fly half and the outside center. And you used to build a little society there. When you on defense, you go like this. On attack, you use like that. And I was, for my height and weight, it was quite big. I think it's like 6.6 in US. So I was like more a ball carrier than dribbling or agility.
Yeah.
But that was I love about the sport is the brotherhood you generate, because you enter to a small battle against another team. And obviously there's a lot of strategy behind that. I have a lot of friends from Edinburgh and from France.
Yeah.
And obviously from my old club in Argentina.
That's interesting that you kind of form your own, like you say, your own little community within the 15. Okay, did you have a rugby nickname?
I had a few in my young days. They called me Cachalote. Cachalote is a synonym of something big.
Okay.
My professional days, I don't know, I was an Argentinian between Scotland, England, and South African guys.
Yeah.
I don't know, it was like the Spanish-speaking guy.
Right.
But yeah, I'm not going to speak French. Don't ask for that.
and I won't speak Spanish. We'll all be good here. Before we jump in, can you give us just kind of a quick overview of Voila? It's raised a lot of money, pursuing a lot of different products, but you can kind of give us the quick story on Voila.
Yeah, of course. So Voila is a financial ecosystem where we operate in 3 countries, Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico. We started in Argentina more than 7 years ago. Our mission is to bring the financial services to the new century. I think one of the best ways to say it is we want to improve the quality of the life of our users. How do we do that? Well, that's obviously offering every single services on our app. So in Argentina, we have all the investments products. We have all the credit products where we have credit cards, personal loans. We have installments, and we have point of sale loans. And then we have all these services around merchant acquiring and obviously the payments solutions where we have QR, we have obviously wire transfers and everything, and our debit card and everything around that. So that's Voila overall. And the same thing is what we have in Colombia and Mexico, where I live right now. The only difference is compared to when we started is we bought banks in all our 3 countries because we believed in order to grow the business, you have to have the correct license, and the correct license is a bank in all these three countries.
Okay, so after rugby, you were living in Spain. What inspired you to move to Mexico? What did you see happening in Latin America and fintech that appealed to you?
There's obviously a great opportunity across Latin America. In Europe, the financial services and the digitalization of money has already happened. So there's not a big opportunity. And that's why Latin America and all the developing countries inside Latin America are pretty much at the same point in time in terms of financial inclusion and credit to GDP. So what I saw as an opportunity in Latin America is increasing the level of credit to GDP in all the three countries we operate. Obviously, Argentina is starting from a low point because of the macroeconomic conditions we had over the last 10 years, but nowadays is improving really fast. And then in Argentina, credit to GDP is around 5 to 10% and growing right now. And then Colombia is at levels of 20 something, and Mexico around 30 to 40 something. So obviously there's a great opportunity, because what I always say is credit is social justice in order to develop, for the people to develop themselves in the countries.
Yeah, so I think this is a great point. What I say about Latin America is for the last 100 years, 5 to 10% of the population has been pretty well banked, right? But it's been very much like private banking. And kind of with the invention of Neobank, right? I think people realized that Latin America, you could do broader scale lending in a kind of structured way, not kind of the informal way it had been done for, I guess, probably a long time. So I totally get that it's a new thing there. Can you talk a little bit, though? The three markets we hear everybody talking about are Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. Like those are the three that everybody seems to want to go after. How are Argentina and Mexico different in terms of their maturity, given that maybe competitive and framework?
Yes. So obviously there are some difference between Argentina and Mexico. I would start with Argentina. So Argentina is a place where the risk is a macro, but there's not a huge credit risk. So if you look at the bureau scores, there's not a big issue.
Interesting.
There's a culture of payment, your debts. There's a lot of information around. There's free information in order to see whether a client is delinquent in other entities. So that's a good thing about Argentina. Obviously, in the last 10 years, the risk was more macroeconomic and everything around the FX. So if you invest money in Argentina, then recover that money is an issue. So obviously that prohibited Argentina to receive foreign investment. But I think this is having a good turnaround as we are seeing the inflation going down. The reference rate, just for you to know, was 100% 1 year ago.
Yeah.
So, and now we're having a reference rate of 29. The central bank yesterday reduced the reference rate from 32 to 29. So obviously, if you compare that for other countries, it is still high. But if we see where we come from, this is the start of economic stabilization. Obviously, the most important thing to grow a credit book is reducing inflation. In Mexico, there's macroeconomic stability. The inflation is quite low, around 4 to 5%, which is quite healthy right now. The reference rate right now in Mexico is around 10%. So obviously that's a good environment to grow a credit book. But the issue in Mexico is credit risk and fraud. Those are two things that need to be very careful when you build the credit policy and when you start the go-to-market of any credit product. From what I've seen in the bureaus of fraud, there's a higher risk in Mexico if I compare it to Argentina. So those are the difference. Argentina, the risk is more macroeconomic if you look at the history of the last 10 years, and Mexico is more about credit risk and fraud.
Yeah, so Mexico has a pretty bad reputation when it comes to fraud. So yeah, what have you guys done to combat that? Is there anything innovative you've come up with, or is this just kind of a daily hand-to-hand combat kind of situation?
No, I think what we've done in order to control this is using obviously the best technology possible. Our onboarding process is really good. If there's not a match to the central system of information, then we do not grant credit in any form, neither personal loans or credit cards. So that's the first one. And then our credit cards are infoless. What this means is there's no information on the credit card, neither the number or the code. There's just the name and the last four digits. So that obviously helped us a lot not to have a lot of fraud in Mexico. as you mentioned, there's a day-to-day battle with our teams in order to make sure we have the best-in-class systems in order to combat fraud. But so far, those two things, I think they helped us a lot.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about fraud is you have to remember the fraud guys are in business too, right? So as soon as you figure out how to stop them, they're always kind of probing. Maybe I'm stretching an analogy here, but it's kind of like rugby, right? You're always kind of probing to find that opening, and then when you find it, you gotta run like hell, as I understand it at least. And so certainly what we've seen is every time we build a new defense, I think we started doing you got to hold up your ID. And so they started printing IDs with their faces on it and other people's identities, right? I mean, so fraud is always interesting to me. And I think Mexico is, if nothing else, we'll say at least innovative on the fraud front. And so it makes for an interesting place to have to fight that. All right, so let's talk more about Walla specifically. You joined, I think, about 2.5 years ago. Like, what was the state of the business then, in Mexico, and kind of how has that evolved over the last 1.5, 2.5 years?
Yeah, so when I joined Voila, we were in the process of buying the banks. We needed the approval both in Argentina and Mexico. But that was one of the decisions why I joined, because I thought at that time that was a great decision, because our strategy in credit is low and grow, right? So what I mean low is you start with low limits and then you evolve them on the good clients to grant them higher limits. Doesn't matter if that's a personal loan or a credit card, but at the end of the day, you need to grow them through their credit journeys, through their life cycle. Everybody can do the low part.
Right.
Any fintech, any bank can do the low part, because that's just iterating credit policy, going through the learning cycles and evolve the credit policy until you get at some point where you're very comfortable to your price for risk or the profitability you have on every cohort. But in order to do the grow, there you need the correct funding. And that's why a bank with the deposits and the term deposits, which is also key, helps you to do that, to make sure you have the asset liability in order and not have an issue on the funding side. So that's why I believe that was a great decision back 3 years ago, and that helped me to make the decision to come to Walla. The stage at that point in time, Mexico was, we didn't receive the approval and we didn't have any credit product launch. So that was zero. And then in Argentina, we had personal loans and installments. That's the two main products, but the business was not scaled. The team of the credit team was around 10 people. As we all understand, the profitability from every bank or financial entity comes from taking deposits and lending them to either people, companies, or the public sector. So now, obviously, Voila, at the stage where we entered, we had 4 to 5 million customers, and we had an amazing opportunity to grow the business. And that's what we did. So what we did is evolving our credit scoring, what we call Voila Score. We transformed that into 6 or 7 modules on our clients, and we did that 30x that you mentioned earlier. We obviously increased the credit book. We bought a company on point of sales. We launched the credit card. And we went from a 10 people credit team to a 200 people credit team right now.
Wow.
And obviously we launched now 1.5 years ago the credit card and personal loans in Mexico, which we are starting to have a great track on how we are scaling that book. One important thing here is, which is my approach to scale a business in a startup, is build the team from the bottom, not from upwards. It's very important you have the hands to do all the analytics and the operational stuff that needs to be done, because when you start a business, there's a lot of manual processes. There's not great automated processes. So you need the people in order to make sure that happens. And once you start to scale a business and you come to a certain point where you're starting to have operational leverage, then you start to building the senior people to the team. Because obviously the senior people, if you bring earlier the senior people to the team, they will ask for a team. And the team is not there.
Right.
So that's something I learned through the process, starting from the bottom and then to the up. And then obviously when you get to a place where now we need to do tenfold from something really big. And that's where you need senior people to help you on that journey.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. But it puts a lot of pressure on you to do the hiring, right? How did you go and hire those 190 people?
Well, that's a big process. Obviously, there's a lot of things you can do internally, but there's some things that you need third parties. So hiring 200 people in 3 years is not an easy task. Obviously, part of that is collections, but the technical
Sure.
product teams. So we have commercial products and underwriting, and that takes time. And you do it at the same time as you scale the business. And there's a point where you need senior hires, and we work with third parties such as you guys that help us to bring every senior guy from Capital One, which is we are in Argentina the first company that hired a Capital One person to help us to grow the book.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now we are having a very big book in Argentina, but we need to go to what banks have right now in Argentina. I believe we are 1 year, 2 years behind that.
That's awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned a couple of products in Mexico. How has that evolved? Was there a strategy behind it, or was just kind of this was the easiest thing to get to market and then we moved to the next thing?
No, there's a different strategy in Argentina and Mexico, and there's a reason for that. So in Argentina, we had a very big user base already because they were transacting already with Walla, but they were not using the credit products because maybe the policy was too conservative. So we started being more aggressive in offering to them our credit products. And we started with installments because that was a very short-term product.
Mm-hmm.
The interest rate was a little bit higher, so we can include or underwrite those higher risk customers. Once we did that, then we started evolving to longer terms and then to personal loans. Personal loans right now is like 36 to 48 months, the longest terms. So we started on those products because in Argentina still there are cap rates on the credit card. So if you want to be a path to profitability, that's why you need to start with those personal loans and installments products. And the credit card is focus more on middle or high income clients in order to make sure we retain those clients within our ecosystem. In Mexico, the strategy is different because we can have a path to profitability with the credit card already because of the unit economics of the product in Mexico. Obviously, as we mentioned, being very careful with credit losses and fraud. If that is controlled, there is a clear path to profitability, and personal loans is a product that we have right now. We use it to cross-sell to credit card users, but
Yep.
we're also doing a similar strategy to what we did in Argentina with low limits and then moving to longer terms, higher amounts and lower rates.
Yeah, so you mentioned low and grow. Low and grow was the core strategy in the subprime business at Capital One when I joined. You said it exactly right. It's easy to do low. The grow part tends to be harder. So when I joined, I was doing account management for subprime. I think I had a team of 6 and acquisitions had a team of 60. So there were 60 people doing the low and 6 of us doing the grow. I think over time we demonstrated the ability to make the growth actually very profitable, both on its own, but because it also helped you retain customers. And so it sounds like you guys are kind of starting with that short-term product. People who pay well will evolve into the credit card product, which I think is a very natural evolution. You referenced rate caps in Argentina. What have been the regulatory hurdles in Mexico? Is it pretty free or is there a lot to deal with?
No, I think the hurdles in Mexico are more about the process you go in order to get a bank, in order to get physical machine partnerships with other retailers, in order to launch a product, and obviously to get the approval of the bank, because that took us like 18 months to get done.
Right.
So I think the environment is quite free in terms of what you want price for risk, but obviously being careful on what do we charge, and you're very similar with our competitors or even lower than them. But the hurdles are more around the process in order to scale the business. There's a lot of things that are just bureaucracy, and obviously that's one of the reasons why the banks in Mexico are really profitable, at least the big banks. But there's still a big opportunity in Mexico with 50% of the people out bank accounts, just 20% of the people with a credit card. So there's still a big opportunity, but it takes time to have everything in place in order to grow.
Yeah. I think when we first met you guys, you had just maybe bought the bank or were in the process and you were looking at 6 months to get the approval. I think the regulatory approval never is as quick as people think it's going to be or should be. Let's talk a little bit about data and analytics, AI. Like, how are you using that to scale this business? You mentioned at the start, you're very, it's all very manual and hands-on, and obviously at some scale, you can't do that. So How has that evolved for you guys?
Well, obviously, all our scoring models use AI in a way. So that's obviously a central part of our capabilities. That's one. Second, our chatbot is using AI, conversational AI. That's something new we'll launch in Argentina. We will launch it hopefully this year in Mexico. And then we use also AI for collections. There's a really big opportunity because collections is the interaction with the client is quite simple. There's not a lot of issues that could go bad within collections interaction.
Yeah.
So that's why we also implemented there. We're seeing great results, how effective the conversations are, how we can use the collectors team to focus more on more complicated cases.
Yep.
Or maybe late stage delinquency. An early stage delinquency is done by AI.
Interesting. Are you doing that through the app or are you doing that through WhatsApp?
The chatbot is within the app. But collections is done by WhatsApp because it's the most
effective.
80% of our interactions on collections are done by WhatsApp.
Yeah. All right. Let's wrap up here we've talked about how you've evolved so far. Where do you see Walla going from here over the next 5 years? Are we expanding products? Are we expanding markets? Yeah. Where are you guys headed?
Obviously, we want to be the biggest neobank in Spanish-speaking LatAm because we know Neobank is the biggest in Brazil. So that's our ambition. That's something I love about Walla is we are really ambitious in our objectives on what we see on ourselves. Being a public company is not an objective itself, but it's a path or a way to grow after that even further because you can have the capital for that. But what we see is obviously having millions and millions of clients that operate with Walla, and at the end of the day, we can improve their lives because they don't need to go to a branch to do anything around their financial life. And obviously launching a longer term credit products that are along the life cycle and maybe going to high income clients. But that's 5 years ahead of us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been an amazing story over the last 7 years. I think it is a fascinating market, and there's probably the 3 or 4 or 5 markets people have attacked. There's plenty others of the smaller markets that folks will find their way into over the next couple of years. Well, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for talking about rugby. I will tell you, if you haven't seen that final play from the Olympics, you really should catch it. We'll post a link in the podcast here. It's one of the greatest moments in sports I've ever seen. I want to thank you again. So you can follow Ensemble X and Joaquin. I'll spell his real name. It's Joaquin. I've looked Joaquin up on LinkedIn and never succeeded. So Joaquin Dominguez on LinkedIn. You can also visit us at ensemblex.com. You can find the Ensemble X Exchange podcast on all major platforms. Really thank you, Joaquin, for joining me today.
It's been a pleasure. And let me just use a phrase I always use to share with my team is, if you can't handle uncertainty, you can handle growth.
We've got plenty of uncertainty right now. All right. Thanks so much.